Hello everyone, welcome to MeroSiksha. I'm Vivechana Sharma. So today I am with the another content, and that's voice. So this is the chapter which is considered quite difficult by most of the students, right? But now let us crack this. So let us begin with the introduction. So what is voice? So voice is all about, it's a form of a verb. So what type of a verb it is? It is a type of a verb or the form of a verb that talks about the performance of a subject in a sentence or the affection of that particular action that the subject performs in a subject. So in order to understand voice in a very simpler term, we can just understand it as the verb that shows whether the subject is performing the action or receiving the action. You just can understand it with the two words, performance or the receiving. Whether the subject is performing the action in a sentence or the subject is receiving the action in a sentence. So moving on, there are two things that are very important whenever we talk about a voice, and that's two things are agent and the action. So voice just talks about agent and the action. So here, so agent is the one who performs or does the action in a sentence, and the action, it is action in a talking about the action, it's all about what is done by the agent is focused. So talking about the voice, we have two types that is the one we are much more familiar with, that is active and the passive one. Now let us find out what is active voice and what is the passive voice. So active voice is a form of a verb in which subject, which is whether a person or a thing, performs the action. So talking about the active voice, it's all about we receive a sentence in which subject is performing the action. So active voice performs the action, right? For example, here Ganga feeds the dog. So which one is subject over here? Ganga is the subject and the word feeds is the action that is performed by the subject Ganga. So in this example, Ganga is the subject, and what is she doing? What is she performing? She is performing the act of feeding over here. So whenever we receive a sentence in which the agent is performing the action, that is active voice. Moving on, active voice is also more directive. So we receive the performance of the subject in a more direct idea rather than in an exclusive way. Okay, so here agent is also emphasized. So talking about in order to understand whether the sentence is active or the passive, we can also look at the agent, because in active voice agent is much more emphasized than that of the action what is performed. So here, for example, let us find out the example. What is this exactly the emphasis on the agent mean? So here the example reads, the police catch a lot of criminals in London. So here what are we focusing on? We are not just focusing on the lot of criminals being caught, but we are focusing on the performance that is performed by the subject. And the what is the performance that is being performed by a subject? Here the police is the subject, and what is the action that the police is performing? He is performing the act of catching. So instead of focusing on what he is catching, we are just focusing that the agent, this particular action, is performing the action of catching. Moving on to the next example here, I loathe people pulling my hair. So we are here as well. So what are we focusing? We are not just focusing on what I hates, but rather we are just focusing on this people who pulls the hair of I. So now moving on, let us find out what passive voice tells. So passive voice is also a form of verb in which subject is affected by the action of the verb. So here in our passive voice we also have a subject, but in this particular idea subject is affected by the action. So in simpler terms, we can understand that if you are not able to understand what is this affection means, but rather we can understand it in a way that subject receives the action that is denoted by the verb in the passive voice. So if you receive a sentence in which the subject is receiving the action rather than that of the performing, then we can understand that that particular sentence is passive voice. Okay, so here for example, the dogs are fed by Ganga. So beforehand I mentioned about the active voice of the same example, that the Ganga feeds the dogs, right? So in the previous one, Ganga was performing the action of feeding, but over here in this sentence here, the dogs, now the word that was object beforehand here turns out to be the subject. And what is this subject doing? This particular subject is not performing, but this particular subject is receiving the action. And what is the action that it is receiving? It is receiving the action of feeding. So here the subject, instead of performing the action, but rather it is receiving the act of Ganga. The act that is performed by the Ganga is received by these dogs, isn't it? So here we can also, the very important note that you should be very much clear about is the object of the active voice becomes the subject in the passive voice. So this is kind of a mantra that you should be much more familiar with. So whenever you are to reproduce the passive form, looking at the active one, make sure that you replace the idea of subject and the object as well. It will be much more easier for you to make your answers correct. So moving on to the next idea, let us find out what is the another thing that helps us to understand the idea of passive voice. So passive voice is more inclusive than that of the active voice. In an active voice, agent is focused rather than that of the action, but here in passive voice, action is much more focused over here. So here it is, this passive voice is also considered to be much more inclusive. So moving on, action is much more emphasized than that of the agent over here. We don't focus on the agent, we don't focus on who performed the action, but rather we talk about the what action has been performed. So the purpose is focused. We can understand it in a way that the purpose, that is action, is focused in passive voice. So let us go with the examples now. So here's the active voice and here's the passive voice. So here the active voice reads, the police catch a lot of criminals in London. Now as we have to change this into the passive voice, how are we supposed to change? This one is the subject over here, this one is the verb, action, and the rest of the sentence consider it as the object, right? So now here what are we doing? The first thing is we are just bringing the changing the place of the object and the subject whenever we are changing in this passive form first of all, and then after that we are emphasizing on the receiving of the action rather than the performance. So here while changing, we have changed it in a way, a lot of criminals, which one was object over here turns out to be the subject in a passive voice, and then here we are changing the tense as well. We'll be talking about it in our later slides, how we are supposed to change the tenses. So here we are talking about this subject is receiving the action of being caught where in London, by whom? But the police. The performance that is performed by the police in active voice is being received here whenever we are changing in a passive voice. So other sentences also goes in that particular way. So in a simple way, what you have to understand is, in a passive voice, purpose is much more focused and we focus on the action that is performed, that is performed by the agent. Rather than focusing on the performance of the agent, we focus on the action, we focus on the recipient who receives the action. So moving on, let us find out the structure. So what is the structure? So here, when talking about whenever we are to write in an active voice, we just write in a very simple structure that we have been doing in everyday basis. That is subject, verb, and the object. So here, verb, we or talk about the action. That is somebody follows me home every day. So but now whenever we are changing this particular active into a passive voice, we are supposed to change the position of the subject and object as well. So here object is the one that receives the action. Receiver of the action is placed at the first, and then we change the verb. That is, first of all we put the be form of the verb and then the past participle form of that particular verb, and then we connect it with the agent, and we add the one who performed the action with the preposition by, but it's quite optional. We can either whether eliminate the agent or you can either place the agent. So now here somebody follows me home every evening. As we have to change this, we change this in this way: I am followed home every evening by someone. So this isn't which one here, the one who the one which was subject over here turns out to be the object in this sentence, and is quite optional as well whenever we are changing into a passive form. Now let us talk about the rules that are to be internalized whenever we are talking about the active and the passive voice. The first rule is, so move the object of the active voice into the position of the subject, that is front of the sentence in the passive voice. So the first and foremost thing that you are supposed to do is you are to change the position of the subject and the object. Okay, so whenever you are changing in a passive voice, you are supposed to bring the object in the active voice into the place of a subject in a passive voice. So and move the subject of the active voice into the position of the object, and you are supposed to place the subject in active voice to the object in a passive voice. So here it is, they don't rent cars there. So they is a subject over here, it's the verb, and then we have the car object, and it's the rest of a sentence. So now here, how are we doing it? Bringing the object in the position of the subject. So here we brought this subject over here, and it turns out to be the subject over here in the passive voice, and then we also change this verb, and then we are done. Cars are not rented there. So now rule number 2 is, the passive voice needs a helping verb to express the action. Always remember that the passive voice is always in need of a helping verb. So we need the helping verb whenever we are to express the action in a passive voice. So the main verb of the active voice is always changed into past participle. The first thing is we are to add the helping verb, and the second thing is we are to change the verb that is in an active into a past participle form, that is third form of the verb V3. Okay, now let us find out how. So here example, the gardener waters the flowers every day. So here is the verb waters. So here is the gardener, it's a subject, it's a verb, and it's the object. So now what are we doing over here? The object is presented here in the place of the subject. The flowers, now we added the auxiliary verb being based on the subject. So we are to also add, whenever we are adding the auxiliary verb or the helping verb, we are to look after the subject first of all, and then this waters is changed into the verb 3 watered, and then we are placing the other ideas of a sentence. So the flowers are watered every day. Now let us find out the another rule. So rule number 3 is, when the subject in an active sentence is a pronoun, that are I, we, you, he, she, they, it, we are supposed to change into, whenever we are writing in a passive form, we are supposed to change it into a this way. So it's a passive, so it's active. So the idea is, I becomes me, and then we becomes us, but you remains you, and then he, if the he is a subject in an active form, it turns out to be him. In a passive form, she also turns out to be her, and they also turns out to be them, and at the end it remains same. Okay, this one is quite simple. So moving on to the next idea, rule number 4. When the active sentence begin with a question word, that is, if you have received interrogative sentence in active form, then the passive sentence also begins with the question word. So if you have received interrogative form in active, you are also supposed to begin with the interrogative question as well whenever you are doing the changing it in a passive form, that is active voice. What do they prefer to it? So here the passive voice also begins with the question what, and then we'll be doing changing the rest of the sentence. Now let us talk about the rule number 5, subject verb agreement idea. So as I already mentioned before, you are to place the verb, that is helping verb, being based on the subject that you are choosing to keep. So here, make the first verb agree with the new subject in the passive voice. So you are supposed to include two verbs, that is one helping verb and the main verb in our passive voice. So the first verb must agree, that is the helping verb must agree with the subject. Okay, so here the gardener waters, here in the active form, the gardener waters the flowers every day is the idea. Here the gardener, here we are talking about the single gardener and we have the singular verb over here. Now whenever we are changing into a passive form, we kept flowers became the subject, and being based on the subject we have chosen the helping verb, that is plural the subject, plural the verb. Okay, now let us move to the another idea here, that is passive form of different types of sentences. Now we are not to receive only one type of sentences whenever we are receiving a question, right? So we'll be receiving different types of sentences, and how are we supposed to change all those sentences? So now here, if the sentence, let us talk about the assertive sentence. We all know what is assertive sentence, right? So here it talks about, here we receive it in a subject, verb, object. For example, he teaches English, and if we are to change into a passive form, we ought to use this particular format, that is object and then the auxiliary verb or the helping verb, verb 3, and then we will be adding subject by the preposition, using the preposition by. So here he teaches English is changed into English is taught by him. So always remember this auxiliary verb is choose being based on the subject that we receive. Okay, moving on to the next, that is interrogative sentence. If you receive interrogative one, you will be receiving it in a structure auxiliary verb plus subject and then the verb and then the object, right? So and then you will be followed by the question mark as well. So now you will be, how are we supposed to change? We are supposed to keep the auxiliary verb in its own place, that is if the sentence begins with the question word, then we are to place the particular idea in a question word as well. So here, do you turn the laptop on first? So while changing we use this particular idea, that is the laptop turned on first by you? Now let us find out what are the other things that we ought to do whenever we receive the sentence in an imperative form. So in an imperative form, we do not have subject, we just have verb and object in an active voice, that is just close the door or let the mechanic repair my bike. So now here, whenever we are changing into the passive form, what are we going to do? So this, if we receive the verb and the object only, we are going to change it this way, that is we will be adding let and then the object and then the be form of the verb and the verb, let the door be closed. So but if you receive this let sentence that begins with the let, we will be talking about, so we will be changing this into this form, that is here will be, you have two objects, that is, the first one is the direct object and the another one is the indirect object. This is object 1 and object 2. So here we will be changing the place of the object as well. So we will be bringing object 2 at the first. So let plus object 2 and then the be form of the verb and then the verb 3 and then that is followed by the by and the object 1. So you have to consider object 1 as a subject over in the sentence, okay, and then you are supposed to change it accordingly. So moving on to the next idea, that is optative sentence. So if you receive optative sentence, that is in active form, so here may plus subject plus verb plus object. So may God help you. This is the way how you receive it. Now in order to change it, you will be keeping this may as it is. You will not be changing the position of a may, but rather you will be changing the position of the rest of the sentence. That is object and the be form of the verb and then the verb 3. Okay. Now let us talk about the tenses. So whenever we are changing active into the passive voice, we ought to change the tense as well. So as we have already talked about the tense, so we also know that there are altogether 12 tenses in our English grammar, right? So here there are 12 tenses. That means we have 12 structures. So we have in an active voice, we have 12 structures, but we have only 8 structures in a passive voice. 4 tenses are we are not able to change 4 tenses in the passive form. So here 3 perfect continuous tenses, namely that is past perfect continuous, present perfect and future perfect continuous cannot be changed into passive form. So okay, so moreover these perfect tenses, perfect continuous tenses are not able to, we are not able to change perfect continuous tense into passive form, and also we are not able to change future continuous tense can also not be changed into a passive. So 3 perfect continuous tenses and 1 continuous tense, that is the future continuous tense, we are not able to change into a passive form. So we have only, out of 12 structures, we have only 8 structures in a passive form. Okay, clear? Now, so this is the idea that in order to crack active and passive, you should have a very appropriate knowledge of a tense along with their structures. So if you are not able to recognize in which tense the sentence is provided, you will not be able to change your active sentence into a passive form. It will be a tough job for you. So let us look after the tenses now. So talking about the simple present tense, we already know this structure of the simple present tense, but also let us find out. So here you will be receiving either the verb 1 or the verb 4 along with the subject and the object in an active voice. Now if you are to change into passive form, then object appears at first and then we'll be adding the auxiliary verb and then we'll be adding the verb 4 and then we'll be talking about the agent or the subject with the preposition by. So here people, the subject, see, it's a verb, foxes is the object, and then it's a rest of the sentence. So now what are we doing? Foxes are brought over here, foxes, and being based on the subject we add the auxiliary verb or, and then the see is changed into verb 3 form, that is seen, and foxes are seen in people gardens at night. Okay, so here it's a subject, we brought subject over here and then the rest of the sentence we wrote it. So this is how we are supposed to change whenever we receive the, so what are you to do is you are to memorize the structure. So let us move to the another idea, that is present continuous tense. So the present continuous tense will be receiving with the is, am, are plus verb 4, right? So now what are you supposed to do? So whenever you are to change present continuous tense sentence into the passive form, you are to add being. Between the helping verb and the verb 3, whenever you are changing, you are to add being as well. Okay, present continuous form. So for example, I like people driving me to my home. It's an active form. So I like, it's talking about the how this subject I feels. So now the people is a subject over here, driving is the verb for, and me to my home. So now here, how are you supposed to write? I like being driven to my home. So here, whenever the thing that you should be very much careful about is, whenever you are changing the continuous form, you are to place being in between the helping verb and the past participle form of the verb. Now let us move to the another idea. So present perfect tense. So the present structure of the present perfect tense you will see this way, that is has, have plus verb 3. You will be receiving has, have plus verb 3. Now while changing this in the passive form, what are you to do? You are to add being. In a continuous tense, you added being, that is B-E-I-N-G. Now while you change the perfect tense, you are to add been in between this helping verb and then the past participle of the verb, that is verb 3. So here the sentence read, he has broken a glass. He has the verb 3 and then this is the subject and this is the verb and the object. Now a glass has been broken. Has, the auxiliary verb, will be adding been in between these words and then you will be writing about the subject. Okay, now let us talk about the past form. So the structure for the past form goes this way, that is verb 2. You will be receiving verb 2, and while changing into passive form, you are to change that particular verb 2 into was, were plus verb 3. So the thing is, what you are to focus about is, you're just to focus the verb whenever we are changing the active into passive, or whenever you are reproducing the passive form, looking at the active form. Okay, so you all know that we are to change the position of the object and the subject as well, but you should be emphasizing on the verb as well. It is very much important. So it is very important for you to be very watchful about all these things. So she cooked food. So the food was cooked by her. Now while changing into the past continuous form, so here the active voice reads was, were plus verb 4. Was, were plus verb 4. So now how are we to change this? We will be placing the was, were, and then in a continuous tense will always be. If you receive a sentence in a continuous form, make sure that you add being whenever you are changing it into the passive form. So whether it's a present tense or the past tense in a continuous form, you're always supposed to add being in between the auxiliary verb and the verb 3 form. Okay, so here a dog was chasing, was plus verb 4. Here he was being changed. Here being is to be focused. Now let us move to the another idea, that is the past perfect tense. So the formula for the past perfect tense is had plus verb 3, right? So whenever you are to change had perfect tense into the passive form, you are to add been, whether it's a present tense or the past tense. So here had been plus verb 3. This is the idea. So they had decorated their stage, and here the answer is the stage had been decorated. Okay, now let's talk about the simple future. So you will be receiving you will be adding shall in the if the subject is I or we, and you will be adding will with the other pronouns as well. Not only I and we, you will be adding will with the other pronouns like you, they, he, she, Ram, Sita as well. So now let us talk about the active voice. So here you will be writing, focusing the verb that is shall or will plus verb 1. Shall, you will be choosing whether shall or will being based on the subject, and while changing into the object, again you will be placing the object at the first, and you will be choosing whether you are to put shall or will being based on the object, that is the subject of the passive voice, and then you will be adding the be form of the verb and then the verb 3. So that is if you say C will buy a flower, you'll be writing a flower will be bought by her. So this isn't is quite optional. Let us move to the another and the last one, that is future perfect tense. So the formula is subject plus shall or will being based on the subject that you write, have plus verb 3. So now you will be changing, whenever you are changing the passive, you will be adding been. So how are you supposed to write? Object and the shall, will, and then the have plus been plus verb 3, and then this the rest. This is the, you will be adding, placing the preposition, placing the subject with the preposition boy. So now here, this is the example. They will have painted the house. This one is the active form. Now changing into the passive, you will be writing the house will have been painted. Will have been painted. Verb 3. Boy, them. It's optional, that's why it's in the bracket. So you're not supposed, whether you can write, if you are interested you may write this, so if you're not interested you can leave it as it is as well. So I guess I made you guys clear. Thank you.